Hello. I'm going to sing a few songs from my pictures, a few songs I did for records, and a few songs Bert Bacharach wrote for me. Hi. I'm going to talk about the bad things that happened to me in 30 years of theater. Is this on? Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Including the bad things I did to myself, and including some bad things that were funny. I'm also going to sing 3 songs. When I've sung the third one, it is over. I've been told that we need a break in the show. So I will tell you about the 60s and 70s, and then I will tell you about the 80s and 90s. Because I know there's some people here who don't remember the 60s and 70s. And I happen to know there are a few here who don't remember the 80s and 90s. Okay. The first bad thing that happened to me was getting into theater, where I felt I never actually belonged, that I should have been a librarian somewhere. I have now become one, a sort of librarian of Cafe-Chino history. But I learned all I knew about theater in one summer in Kennebunkport Playhouse. Before then, I had been in a junior high school show, a high school show, and a college show, where I did not really learn anything, which was my fault because I was so stupid and unteachable. In summer stock, where they not only did theater, but everyone slept with me, I paid a great deal of attention. And I learned a great deal about theater. I stopped off in New York on my way back to my home in New Mexico to see a friend. He was not home, it being a work day. I left my baggage with his landlady and asked her where Greenwich Village was, where the artists were. I went into a subway and got out at Sheridan Square and followed a boy down Cornelia Street. The first bad thing that happened to me was that the boy, Johnny Dodd, had been followed sometime earlier by a man named Michael Smith, who had won his affections. So that was the first bad thing. But Johnny became a great friend, as did Michael, and I was at the Chino, where many people here were too. I don't need to tell anyone how wonderful it was. The people who were there know. The people who have been to other Coffee House Chronicles have been told. Very few bad things happened to me at the Chino. Not everybody I wanted to sleep with me slept with me. That really was almost the worst thing that happened. A sort of bad thing that happened. And I'm hoping these bad stories reflect all the great good that happened around them. I was doorman at the Chino. I'm very proud to be so. Jeff Weiss did a play at the Chino called A Funny Walk Home. It was a magical and terrifying play. I don't know, Clarice is here, she could tell you about it. Jeff, at one point near the end, asked the audience if they wanted him to continue. They almost always said yes, and he raped and or murdered his brother, father, and or mother. So a few nights they did. So at any rate, it was deservedly a sensational success. I was good at cramming people into the Chino. I believe the legal occupancy was about 99. I'm sure that at times I got 250 in. People sat in the aisles, people sat on tables, people sat on people. People sat in the scene dock. We could crowd any number of people in that wanted to see it. And the Funny Walk Home was the show more people wanted to see than any other. What's more, by this time we were actually taking reservations, which was a novelty. Harry Katukas introduced the idea of taking reservations. One time when he was doing a play, he said, "I want real reservations like Moliere had." So I had a little clipboard as I stood up front. Jeff's show was long. It took longer to get the people in and served before it started. The reaction was vociferous. It took in other words, it ran long. It was winter. It was bitter cold and ugly outside. The second house, a big house, was in line all down Cornelia Street, shivering in the cold. The show inside went on and on. It got colder and colder. The crowd outside got uglier and uglier, when finally the door burst open and this crowd started pouring out. The next 250 started clawing past me to get in out of the goat. I was shoved in with them. I was actually had to get on the stage for some weird reason as they shoved in and out, breaking tables, knocking down lights, tearing posters off walls. I'm not kidding. Nobody stepped on the stage. So I got up on it and told them, stop it, stop it. They paid no attention. It was really getting quite violent and scary. I took my Masonite clipboard and brought it down on the head of the first person passing and broke it. And I don't know if you realize how hard you have to hit someone to break Masonite. The crack made everyone stop. And I said, out, out, you herd of steaming sheep, you do not deserve fine art. And I threw them out. The place was a wreck. And I stood there staring at it. And Joe Chino came wandering from behind the counter and said, you did right, Bob. You did the right thing. They're animals. They don't deserve it. The world is better without them having the chance to see beautiful, pure art like Jeff's. You did the right thing, baby. And patted me on the shoulder and went back behind the counter. I went out on the street, forced 250 random people in for the next show, and it went on time. The bad, you see, sometimes very good things came out of the very bad. A very bad thing that happened at the Chino. The longest running, not the longest running, the second longest running show at the Chino was Dames at Sea. I'm sure you all know the famous musical. It was exquisite at the Chino. Bob Dada, did Bob come? Bob is ill. Yeah, Bob is ill. Director, actor Bob Dada, who started shows at the Chino. The earliest known photo of a play produced at the Chino is December 1958. Despite all the books that say they started in 1960, I got photographic proof from Bob Dada. Bob basically made the Chino a place where plays were regularly performed. Anyway, Bob directed Dames at Sea. The script had been considered unworkable. It was 3 years old. It had been peddled everywhere. No one would do it. Bob came across it, saw a way to do it with 5 people on a bare stage, summoned the authors and librettists and lyricists to Chino, did it with 6 people, brilliantly. It played and played and played and played and played, made the star of Bernadette Peters, made the show famous, guaranteed the productions worldwide and the fame of the play and Bernadette. When they left the Chino with it, not only did the bastards not take Bob Dada to direct it, the Chino is not included as the place where the play was first done in the published version. When I asked the author why that was so, he said, we couldn't afford to be associated with a place known for homosexuality and drugs, Bob. Now, who's your handsome friend and would you like some hash? I am not making this up. The leaving Bob and the Chino out of Dames at Sea success was...
Yay! Thank you.
Bob Dada will never tell you the story himself. And he's probably mad at me for telling it. But the betrayal of Bob and the Chino by the Dames at Sea crowd was the near rock bottom of my experience there. In future years, this specter haunted the Chino. John P. Dodd, whom most people agree was one of the 3 greatest artists ever to work off Broadway. I've had quarrels with Doric, and I've heard Doric have quarrels with other people. It's a toss-up between Jeff Weiss, John P. Dodd, and Joe Pichette. As Pichette was actually the finest artist ever to work off Broadway, but certainly Johnny was one of them. Late in his life, Johnny Dodd told me, Bob, the reason I've never worked at the Public Theater is that Joe Papp's wife won't hire anyone who worked at the Chino. She's sure we're all junkies and child molesters. And this specter haunted people for the Chino unjustly, just because there were some drugs at the Chino. There were drugs everywhere. The Chino did shows about drugs. You know, I mean, it was honest and paid for that honesty. Was it Wilde who said no good deed goes unpunished? I think it's time. No, one more thing. Joe's death was, of course, the worst thing that ever happened at the Chino or anywhere ever in my life. I'm sure everybody knows the details of it. His lover had died. Some Warhol people who came and hung around the cafe got Joe into very destructive drugs. The last time I saw Joe Chino, he was standing on 6th Avenue, looking dazed out of his mind, hailing down a cab to go to one of several speed doctors he was seeing uptown. That night he came back downtown and one of the Warhol people slipped him acid without telling him. And he killed himself on the stage at the Chino. David Starkweather and Bill Hoffman and I cleaned the blood up and the show went on that night as usual. A bad thing that happened to me from that was that I incurred a certain amount of contempt from the Chino regulars, all of whom had been there long before I came. Kenny Burgess, Tommy Garland, Charles Stanley, other people who worked there, because I insisted the show go on that night and Joe had left me as manager. They despised what they call my Ruby Keeler attitude, but I cannot believe Joe would not have wanted it gone. So it did. Excuse me. Somewhat futilely, in fact, because so many mourners poured into the Chino that they actually began to overlap onto the stage. And Neil Flanagan, who was having trouble enough doing a play about a suicidal queen that night anyway, The Madness of Lady Bride, gave up. It was one of only 2 shows I know that were ever canceled at the Chino. The other was a performance of my first play, The Haunted Host, because there was a fire next door and the place filled with smoke. Oh, about bad things that happened to me. I lived with most of the playwrights at the Chino before it even occurred to me that a simple bumpkin from the country like me could write a play. I wrote one. It was called The Haunted Host. And I brought it in to Joe one day and said, Joe, I wrote a play, you should do it. He, without looking, he threw it over his corner onto a garbage can. Excuse me. And said, Bob, you don't want to be a playwright. Playwrights are terrible people. You're a good guy. You pull your weight around here. Playwrights are vain and egotistic. You'll thank me someday. And I said, oh, all right. However, 3 star playwrights of Off-Off-Road at the time happened to be present. Lanford Wilson, Tom Lyon, and David Starkweather. And they stamped their feet and said, Joe, you should do Bob's little play. He works hard around here. Lanford, by the way, was living with me at the time and had read the play, so he was taking no chances. But it was very brave of Tom and David, because the 3 of them said spontaneously that if Joe didn't do my play, they would do no more plays there. Which was really, considering that it was the crown jewel of Off-Off-Broadway, it was very fine of them. So Joe said, oh, all right, but you'll be sorry. And indeed, he did the play, and I'm happy to say it was one of his favorites. He was thinking of reviving it at the time of his death. And I became a terrible person. So that's a bad thing. After Joe's death, the saddest thing that happened was that some people, and I guess this is where the reputation of the Chino as being universally a drug-riddled place came from. Some people had gotten, during the Warhol people's stay there, into pretty bad drug habits. And it was reflected in the shows and the condition of the place. And I'm afraid I was taken right along. I'm very lucky. I never got addicted to anything. Somebody said I had so much manic energy. It was years before I knew the people around me were taking speed, and they all thought I was taking it, and it was just selfish, keeping my source hidden. But I did get into it, and perhaps I just burned it up fast. I never got hooked. But things got pretty bad. But the only specific bad thing that happened after Joe's death was Charles Stanley, wonderful actor named Charles Stanley, took over management of the Chino with the permission of Joe Chino's family. And we did a great season, by the way. You have only to look it up. It's amazing. I mean, things were going very well. But Charles, one day, brought in this strange little creature, a rather embryonic-looking little creature. She was rather fetid and wobbly and quite tiny and rather repellent, actually. I'm sorry to say. And he said, this is Valerie Solanas, and she has written a marvelous play. And he handed me a play called Scum, which was short for Society to Cut Up Men. It's all very famous now because of the movie I shot Andy Warhol. But he said, Bob, I want you to direct this. I said, why don't you direct it, Charles? He said, no, I think you have the right style for this. So I read it, and I'm afraid I was blind to its virtues. I just didn't see it. I mean, Joe had not been dead long. I didn't want to do a play about it's a pretty repellent play. It's probably pretty good and strong. I wasn't able to see that at the time, and I refused to do it. She took it elsewhere. The bad thing about that is, one, Charles was very angry at me, and two, Miss Solanas shot Andy Warhol for not doing it, for not doing that play. And I sometimes think, it's probably pretty vainglorious on me, I might have saved Andy Warhol's life. For he later died of complications from those wounds. On the other hand, she might have shot me, and I'm probably lucky she did. Anyway. Thank you. Anyway, that was a bad thing. I am, however, going to inflict upon you a song about the good things. This is very long, so be very patient. I think some of the people are here. My heart will always be in Cafe Chino. My heart will always see the Cafe Chino. Since you and I were we in Cafe Chino, my heart will always be in Cafe Chino. There I tarry day and night, seeing shows by Johnny's light, Flanagan as Lady Bright, Heidi's bed in existential black and white, Catucus gave us Charles Stanley as Medea, mad and manly. Ian drove us all bananas, looking up that skirt of Hannah's. Milligan adored Geneso, but the posters could not say so. Kenny Burgess so designed them, only those who cared could find them. When Lance Wilson got too bitter, Maggie Dominic spread glitter. With great names the list is peppered, John Ware, Jeffrey Weiss, Sam Shepard. Alan James had Slim and Rosie, lads read Wiles' love poems to Bosie. Doric Wilson took such chances, with a gay play now she dances. Ron Link, Tom O'Horgan, oh so versatile and virtuoso. Jimmy Waring, John McDowell, Michael Maxey, Warren Powell. Audiences too were star minds, Forney's Cornfell and Al Carmine's. Harris's were never scarce, Walter Jane and George Ted, Judith Gale Harris. Michael Smith was sympathetic, so were Joyce and Gordon Trettick. And there was no friend to true art, loyaler than Ellen Stewart. Hope Stansberry, Rara Davis, Helen Hampton, and Stephen Davis. Charles Lubier, Joe Davies, dames at seas, bespangled navies. Dark and glowering Matt Baylor, Tanya Berezin was paler. Memory will surely bar us from forgetting Don Cavaras. Playwrights stretched into infinity, Sally Ordway, Edith, Laurie, and Rose Kennedy. Also worth remarking are Wally Andro, Chuck, and Roberta Sklar, Zita Litvinos, and Mary Warrenoff, so sexy, scary Ron Tavel, and corresponding Sora Ingenue and Ondine, Phoebe Reagan, Joseph Bushes, French Grace, so outre and luscious. Many names from memory may slip, not Hal Borsky or Bill Hayslip, nor so many on the playing field, Robert Shields and Dr. Cranefield, not forgetting Donald Brooks, who suggested comic books. Boys who'd glow in any era, Selmar Waldron, Bob Kubera. Girls as fair as those by Gauguin, Jeannie Lance and Lucy, Sylvain, Renee Mogan, Tommy Garland, Joe's Love Johnny, Daniel Hayden, Clark, and Connie. Names that still give me a thrill, men. Linda Escanes, John Gilman, Joe's Improbable Pinata, gave us stars like Robert Dada. History will not uncoil an act to equal Mary Boylan. Debbie Liso Botticelli, Eddie Barton, Raffaelli, Countess Ruth, and Ancient Roman, all the gang in Wonder Woman. Let us sing out all together, Hoffman, Foster, and Starkweather. Clarice Nelson, Marshall Mason. Every day a holiday sun. Through the streets I scampered gaily, handing out show leaflets daily. Proud to have all history know I was doorman at the Chino. When I brought the haunted host in, Chino gave me such a roastin', said that the applause and honors made all dramatists piranhas, but he let me hear some laughter, which became my life thereafter, and I owe it all, as we know, to the magic man Joe Chino. When Miss Colton and Miss Charba caught a boat to New York Harbor, they spread off Broadway's trousseau. Coffee Chronicles now will do so. So, the world will always see the Cafe Chino. So there will always be the Cafe Chino. Since you and I were we in Cafe Chino, my heart will always be in Cafe Chino. I'm certainly Richard Smithies, whom I see in the audience, who played in Ionesco and O'Neill and other things that you know, wonders why he isn't in the song. Smithies doesn't rhyme with anything. Except in Middle English, like withies. And how was I going to get withies into a point? Hi, Richard. Okay, that's the long song. Alrighty. Now, as everyone knows, eventually the Chino closed. Nobody's fault. Nobody's fault at all. There was a lot of blame at the time. None of it placed correctly. Without Joe, the Chino was just a theater. And because of the inspiration of the Chino, there were now 300 other off-Broadway theaters to work at. Many of them better equipped and a lot easier to work at. And the Chino closed. I did a bad thing to myself. A Chino director named Andy Milligan, whom you now know as the famous worldwide cult director of gore movies that they used to be called exploitation movies. And he's really world famous now. Also directed for the stage. And he got a date at a new place across town, practically the first other off-Broadway theater besides the Chino. And he asked me, and I was very flattered because nobody thought anything of me, if I would write a dramatic version of Tennessee Williams' play, short story, One Arm. And I said, sure, for I love the story. But then he described what he wanted, and it seemed to be so vulgar and gross and coarse that prissy little me wouldn't have anything to do with it. So I missed the chance to be the first writer to write an original play for the Café La Maman, which I always regretted. I've written much dirtier plays since. But I did, of course, get to meet Ellen Stewart, who unfortunately can't be with us today. She's right next door. We could all go over there. Ellen, I'm sure most of you know her. For those of you who don't, Ellen is a brilliant, visionary, determined visionary. Visionaries are magical people. They make most of the things in the world happen. They can also be very difficult. And one of the problems with visionaries is they see what's ahead so clearly. And they sometimes are impatient with people who don't see the same future ahead that they do. And many people expect Ellen Stewart to be superhuman and have no personal emotions, and no emotions or opinions based on when she was born and where she came from and how she was raised. There may be a lot more tolerant of themselves than they've been of Ellen. I'll leave it at that. I had very few bad experiences at La Mama. And one reason is there were 2 years I didn't go to La Mama. And the first bad experience, Neil Flanagan got a date at La Mama and asked me if I had a play. I gave him the top play on my pile, which happened to be a realistic play about a couple settling in the West. It was done on a double bill with a play from the Open Theater, an extremely avant-garde, abstract, existential play, all movement and sound and no visible coherence. That double bill signaled a dreadful, unnecessary split that was happening off-Broadway. The you might call it between the traditional and avant-garde. Some people felt there should be no realistic or naturalistic or understandable plays done off-Broadway. Others, like myself, felt that I never saw a distinction. I always felt that all plays used the same elements, just in different proportions. If I wrote a realistic play, I was using sound, music, movement, color, just as a totally avant-garde orchestra of flesh play by Tom O'Horgan or Joe Chaikin did. I never saw conflict. Most intelligent people didn't. But there was a hardcore of style fanatics who caused something of a rent in the off-off community. I always thought it was unnecessary. I know Tom O'Horgan, who was the most avant-garde director in the world, used to come see my so-called realistic plays and love them. And that realistic artists like Lanford Wilson and Marshall Mason were always running into the Chino saying, oh, you've got to go see this or that fantastic avant-garde play. Real people didn't see a conflict. Tacky people, some of whom unfortunately had newspaper columns, caused a division. Caused divisions, and sometimes things that were said by newspaper columnists preferring one sort of play to other were taken by the people involved as if each other had said them. There were enmities that were unpleasant to be around because I liked everybody. And I liked seeing everybody and didn't like it when my friends hated each other's guts. The one bad thing that happened to me at La Mama, I was waiting tables there in 1965. And some of you out there may remember that in 1965, the New York Times suddenly decided to discover off-Broadway, and there were reporters and photographers and reporters everywhere you turned. You know, sometimes whole audiences seemed to be made up of nothing but people from the Times. And they were everywhere, and they didn't really know anything. And they were trying to find out things and getting very confused. And it happened that that night there was a lady from the Times at La Mama. And I was at the counter getting an order filled, and right behind me, the lady from the Times asked someone in charge at La Mama, said, oh, by the way, I've been told I must get a picture of this playwright, Robert Patrick. And I was about to say, oh, I'm here. I certainly never expected to be included in this. I was nobody. And then this person at La Mama said, oh, you don't want any pictures of him or anybody connected with that Cafe Chino place. It's all just a bunch of homosexual drug addicts. And I put down my tray and took off my apron and walked out of La Mama for 2 years. That was very bad. I really hated hearing that. It has a sort of happy ending. One night, there was a knock on the door of the flat I shared with a couple of roommates, and it was the Times, a reporter and a photographer. My roommates were impressed as hell. I wasn't. I thought they were just taking everybody. They posed me, took my picture, and I forgot about it. A couple of weeks later, I was walking along Christopher Street, actually, crossing the old Women's House of Detention, and I ran into David Starkweather. At the time, a very prominent off-Broadway playwright. He was reading the paper, and I said, hi, David, what's in the paper? He threw the newspaper at me and said, you are. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. So I opened up the New York Times Magazine, and there was this big article on off-Broadway called The Pass the Hat Theater Circuit. The whole thing was very condescending about all of us doing theater for free. You know. There were a lot of pictures in it, but there were only 3 pictures of individuals: Joe Chino, Sam Shepard, and me. And Sam and I were by no means the preeminent playwrights of off-Broadway at the time. That would have been Lanford Wilson and Paul Foster, hands down. If you saw the photos, you'd see why I say that the only reason they printed our pictures was we looked seedy, dissolute, and wasted. And I'm sure that was their opinion of people who worked for free, and that's why we're in it. I thought this was funny. I thought David's anger was ridiculous. I took the paper over to the Chino, and I opened the door, and all I saw was white. Everyone was reading the paper. And I walked through the house, and everybody was turning their backs on me. And I got to the counter where even Joe was reading the thing. I said, Joe, did you see this? He said, Bob, you shouldn't have come here. This is very bad. You shouldn't have done this, and you should stay away for a while. And I'm like, I'm sorry, my editorship at the Times isn't meeting with your approval. So that caused really bad feeling. Now, this was a surprise to me because, frankly, I was so happy to be at the Cafe Chino in La Mama and off-Broadway. I had never had a trace of an idea of going elsewhere, moving on, having a career. It just had never occurred to me. I thought everybody off our front was happy where they were, working office jobs by day, being underground theater stars at night. I honestly, well, obviously I was, there were a lot of people who felt differently, and to whom this publicity break in the Times was a major event. I was so hurt by people's reaction that a few weeks later, when Life magazine came down to take pictures of the playwrights on a rooftop across from the Chino, Bob Hyde remembers, Terry was there. Is Clarice here? She was there. I refused to go. I said, okay, they want their silly publicity, let them have it. I deeply regret it now. I have that photo, and I would love to see my own face there, young and pretty, among my friends when they were young and pretty and alive. You know, so the bad thing that happened to all of that was, out of hurt pride, I'm not in that wonderful photo with my friends. And that pretty much covers the Chino. At La Mama, very few bad things happened to me at La Mama. That was really the worst, hearing that offer remark. I trickled back to La Mama. I helped Paul Foster organize a big benefit for La Mama when it needed it, which helped a lot of people see us as a movement. 29 very different plays by 29 very different playwrights, all of them pretty brilliant, and really helped coalesce people's idea that this was a movement, a uniquely American art movement, by the way. There was no manifesto, no set of rules, no proclamation of purpose or principles. You know, like Joe Chino told us, we did what we had to do. And like Ellen Stewart showed us, we kept doing it in spite of fantastic obstacles. Anyway, that was a very good experience, the main benefit. That's really about all the bad La Mama experiences. Just a moment. Well, except petty ones. I'm going to take the small ones too. Once Ellen called me and said that Johnny Dodd, the lighting genius, had put up a light show with some actors doing some movement, but it really needed some text. And Johnny agreed, so I wrote a few brief texts for it, and even was in it. And I was very pleased because one of the actors in it was Charles Stanley, and I wrote him a wonderful speech. And Charles so resented a writer being brought in to what he thought of as an actor's showcase that he whispered my speech. lest the words upstaging. Well, he got paid back pretty fast. Lucy Sylvain upstaged him incontrovertibly. Lucy was then a new mother, and she was doing a nude dance, and during her dance, she would go down and spray her milk on the front row. Upstage that, Charles. Okay. I'm just looking to see if there are any other bad La Mama experiences. Not really. I had a good relationship with Ellen all the way. Ellen, I liked doing lots of shows. Hi.
Bob, you forgot when we did Hello from Bertha, Chino, Tennessee Williams, and it won the Coffee Cup Award from backstage. Gwen Van Dam, she's here.
Yes.
Who was in it.
Yes.
She was marvelous.
Yes. Gwen Van Dam. Our Bertha.
The other thing that came from it was that the man who was at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts saw it and gave me a job teaching at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts.
A paying job?
Paying job for 1 year.
Bob Dada, you took money for art? Didn't you feel like a whore? No, I really think that's about all bad that ever happened to me at La Mama. Is that lucky? So now I'm going to sing you the La Mama song. Okay, it's shorter. I'll try to start at a lower key. In a tiny basement, out of grace and self-effacement, Ellen made La Mama etc. She made it for the playwright, not dictating what we may write. So we played La Mama etc. But the cops misunderstood her, couldn't comprehend what could hurt. Draw for all us hungry young men be. So she moved us to a loft then, capable as Laura Croft then, where her artist spoke unbrokenly. She in all her appearings, in stretch pants and big hoop earrings. Shows announced which trounced propriety. A female A-bomb at La Mama, etc. She took all us post-teeners to a nook above a cleaner's for a new La Mama, etc. Where, ignorant what art meant, landlords and the fire department chose to close La Mama, etc. But no one dilly-dallied, 30 dirty playwrights rallied with a benefit that made us see that we had become a movement, entertainment and improvement for a sad and sick society. Sure, some of us got famous, but back then no one would claim us but Joe Chino and Her Majesty, the lady we know as the Mama, etc. Then, gathering resources and her legendary forces, Ellen sent a show across the sea. Tom Paine was its title, virile, vehement, and vital. Europe saw that tour and said, wee wee. Careless what it cost her, Tom O'Horgan and Paul Foster were unfurled to set world drama free. So European artists all turned into avant-gardists, then in a direct trajectory. Now folks from every birthplace send their plays back to the birthplace of theater, fabulous and free. What shows the world owes to La Mama, etc. Mama. Sorry I got out of my key there. It's really quite pretty when I managed to sing right the key. Okay, now some random horror stories to finish out the 70s. They're not all horror stories, but just bad things that happened. I had my first commercial play, my first commercial production, show that was done at the Chino, Camera Obscura. This benefit we did was called Bang. And I made playwrights write or drag out of the doors 29 short plays, and we called them mini plays, right? Well, a theater in California decided to do an evening of such mini plays called Collision Course. Lanford Wilson and Sam Shepard and other well-known playwrights who were in it all told them they must do a play by me because I invented the mini play. So they called me and said, we're rehearsing around the corner, bring a play. So I had the one I grabbed happened to be Camera Obscura. It went very well in the production, and then it was published, and I suddenly was making my living playwriting and didn't have to work in offices anymore. I wish Joe had been around to see that happen. However, it was some of the playwrights that were in Collision Course, it was my first time to meet them, and I was very happy. People like Terrence McNally and Israel Horowitz. I can't even remember who all was in it, but all people who became great names afterwards. And I invited them all to come see a production of a play of mine that was going on at the time. Now, I had not had any time to be around this production, you understand. Somebody else was directing it, and I was going to go run follow spot for it opening night. So a lot of these playwrighs whose respect I wanted so badly came to see it. And I was up in the follow spot booth, so I couldn't even do anything as the worst production any human being ever had unfolded on stage. Just to give you a sample, the stage of the 13th Street Theater is slightly raked, so the audience sees the floor. During the first scene of the play, a water bug the size of a water buffalo skittered across the stage. One of the actors, rather than just letting it skitter off, stepped on it for the remainder of the first act. At the end of the first scene, that character walked off and slammed the door. The set had been so flimsily constructed that when he slammed the door over here, a wall over here began to fall on the roof, who stared at it hypnotized. By sheer fortune, there was a window in it which fit right over it. It was difficult for the show to proceed on the proper level of satire after that. Helen Hapt climbed in a window with a whip to beg the hero to whip her. She couldn't get the window open. Well, fortunately, there was no glass in it, so she just climbed the whip. She went to snap her whip, and it snapped off of its handle. Somehow they got through the first act, hoping that the big confrontation scene between the hero and the evil king of a foreign country over dinner in the second act would save the show. There was to be a long table at each end of which one was the hero and one the villain, right? Very dramatic confrontation in polite circumstances. A surefire scene. Unfortunately, the director thought that if he put a little table like this at one end of the table and another little table at that end and stretched a sheet between them, it would serve as the table, which it did for about 1 minute, till one of the actors let go of it, and the dinner slowly began to sag to the ground. At this point, Terrence McNally and Israel Horovitz were using each other's hair to wipe their tears off. And I fear that my reputation among those whom I would have as my peers suffered probably irreparably from that experience. Okay, that was bad. Another interesting experience of the 60s, in 1969, The Haunted Host went on, and I was blessed with Neil Flanagan and Joe Fischette in one play, Dreamcast. It was a lovely production. It didn't last long because the people who rented us the theater didn't tell us they were going to rent the basement to a tap dance show simultaneously. When we tried to sue about this, we discovered we couldn't because they didn't actually own the theater. It was deserted and they had broken in and skipped town at the rent and everything disappeared. But it was a nice memory anyway. However, my friend Bobby Kubera, who's dead now, Bobby was one of the most beautiful boys in New York and was making it pay, shall we say. He thought that I should make some money too, so he offered to take me to a party with the rich men that he knew. And we went, dressed perhaps a little more outre than people in the East 50s were used to. As Bobby said afterwards, I guess the 60s haven't reached the 50s. So we went in to peddle it, as it were, among the rich men. And they were not sure even that we were gay. There was a uniform gay people were supposed to wear in that world, and we weren't wearing it. So these quite polite, educated, rich men were very nervous to be gay with two guys there who may not be gay, right? So they started feeling us out, as it was called in those days, trying to get us to, as it were, drop a hairpin. Now, Bobby and I, who were so relaxed about being gay that it was actually comical, had no idea what they were doing, you know. So this one man came over and said, I understand you're in theater in some way. I said, yes, I am. He said, I saw just one interesting play this year. I said, oh? He said, yes, it was called The Haunted Host. He was going, obviously, to lead into telling me that it was about a gay man, and how did I feel about that? I said, oh, I wrote it. They had us thrown out. Not because we might be straight, because they were sure we were insane. Because nobody with hair that came down to here could conceivably actually be a playwright. Bob Heidi and John Gilman are here, are they not?
Yeah.
Bob and John and I had an interesting hair experience. People wonder why we wore long hair in the 60s. You know, why was that? Well, it started by accident. We were poor. And skipping a haircut meant we could see another movie or have another meal. And besides, we all thought it was sort of raffish and bohemian because, you know, long hair had been intellectual in the 1800s in Vienna. And, you know, so it was kind of fun. But then we began to discover that, for instance, if we went into a store to buy cigarettes with hair just below our earlobes, we wouldn't get served. And if we protested, we'd be told, get out, get a haircut. Seriously, you know, I was like, what? A quarter inch of hair makes you so shocked? Well, yes, it did. And we discovered the longer you grew it, the more you learned about society. And it got to where people would say, oh, your plays are too critical about society. Things aren't that bad. We'd say, yeah, let your hair grow. And that is how long hair became associated with the youth movement. However, hair of all kinds could cause you trouble. Bob Heidi and John Gilman and I were walking along West 4th Street one time, headed for the Chino. We were right in front of that restaurant named Joe's that used to be on the corner. And suddenly, a taxi cab driver, Bob and John were rather assisted blondes at the time. And my hair was not quite as long as Prince Diane's. This man had looked at our hair and went crazy. He knocked down with his cab 2 parking meters and crashed against the lamppost, screaming, "Faggots, faggots, faggots." We stood there. Do you fellas remember this?
Yeah.
We stood there. Yeah, we stood there dazed. And the cops came, let him go with a warning, and told us to get our hair cut. I mean, you see what I mean? Hair told the story. It also turned out to look gorgeous on middle-class boys, but that's another story. Okay. After the Chino closed, I'm trying to use these in order. The next bad luck I had was meeting the greatest actor I ever had in a play, Joe Pichette, who was not only the greatest of actors, but perfect for my plays. The perfect instrument to carry my message to the world. That was all fine and good. That was good. The bad part was I fell in love. I've always fallen in love with men for their talent. It's no smarter than falling in love with them for their looks. Let me tell you. But I followed Joe to a bar called the Old Reliable Theater Tavern, where I worked for several years. Many other people from the Chino, La Mama followed me. Bob and John did shows there. Harry, I think you did a show there. Bob Dalla, you know, I can't really see who's here, so I don't know. But lots of people here did shows over there. It became the next place, as they call it. It was great fun. Somebody, even though it was in a neighborhood where you seldom did not see a burning car, we got great crowds. It was called The Last Elizabethan Audience by one critic. And one actress who worked there, Janine O'Reilly, actress playwright, said, "Of course we get big houses here. People are afraid to come alone." But it was certainly the next place. The vitality was incredible. I think they did a show here about it, the Coffee House Chronicles, and it deserves one. But in fact, I really achieved my first real prominence doing show after show after show at the Old Reliable. It was great fun. I had Neil, Joe, many other fine actors to work with. Barbara Montgomery, Lamar Alford, June Purse, Kitty Hill. You know, that's another show. It really is. They were fantastic. But I was also going insane. I was doing too much. It's a lifelong habit, but I guess I was getting older. I was a mess between my unrequited love for Joe, which I mentioned only was a major element in my life history, and this endless labor. I know we all worked on everybody else's shows. I mean, just because I wasn't doing the show didn't mean I wasn't stage managing, doing props, and acting. But it was insane. I should tell the Candy Darling story. We're talking about bad things that happened. I acted in a play by John Hart that he'd gotten Candy Darling to star in. Candy was a great and famous, deservedly famous drag actress, drag actor. You know, he's a guy dresses girl and had tits. Okay. But incredibly beautiful. I mean, words cannot tell you how beautiful and gracious he could be, or what a campy queen he'd turn into. He was cast in a very dignified role in this play. I was cast as his aged husband. And things went very well in rehearsal. Opening night, Candy's fans were there, and Candy did the Candy Darling show, not speaking a line of the play. We were all just... the next night, my entrance was through the bar part of the Reliable. The next night, I thought of going on stage with him again and ordered 2 scotches, and went on drunk, and managed to take a little of the show back from Candy. And at one point, Candy started to get up to do a song. I gripped her wrist and made it clear I would break it if she didn't go on. So things got better. That was not fun. But it was clear I was going nuts. And Paul Foster, God bless him, who was rich from his play Tom Paine at the time, saw that I was going nuts and paid for a 3-week trip to Europe for me so that I could see Ramses Shafi, the Marlon Brando of Holland, do my haunted host over there, for which he didn't pay me. And I went to France to work with, we're talking about bad things that happened. You don't think only bad things happen. I went to France for a week where I worked with Jerome Savary's Magic Circus and was so happy and loved them all so much. Later, I learned that they had put a page in the program ridiculing me as a silly American coming over and trying to be avant-garde. That wasn't fun. I got to London where I expected to stay with the Lamama Troupe. Well, guess what? They had left the day before for Hollywood to do the Futz movie. And of course, no one knew where to reach me to tell me. I found a bed for myself as best I could in London for a night. And then I called the Travers Theatre in Scotland, and they said, well, sure, Bob, come up. We need a writer anyway. So they sent me train fare, and I went up. And for 5 days, I stayed there writing a 5-person version of Dracula, my first commissioned play. And I was very pleased with how I managed to double roles meaningly and poetically and create for them a full version of Dracula with only 5 players. They were very happy, too. I didn't see any Edinburgh, Glasgow, Edinburgh. So they took me, because the only time they took me out was to eat Chinese, which is apparently what Scott did. And once they took me out to see a Dracula movie. So I was very pleased, and then after I got back to America, I learned that right after I left, they'd gotten a grant. And they did a 60-person Dracula and didn't use my script at all. So that was bad. Well, I'm only telling you the bad things. Back at the Old Reliable, a very bad thing happened, which at the time caused a lot of bitterness. My last show at the Old Reliable was a double bill of comedy and a drama, both directed by Neil Flanagan, who had, Neil was a great actor, great director, great person, great teacher. He'd always done great shows for me and with me. And this time, I guess Neil may have been deep down tired of doing it for free because he grotesquely miscast plays with people who could get him jobs, paying jobs, people from who owned theaters. And it was really embarrassing. And I had to close the shows, which caused terrible things between me and Neil, terrible things between me and the cast who did not understand how badly they were miscast, and terrible troubles between me and sweet Speedy, who owned the bar and who had always been so good to us, so appreciated our bringing customers into the shows. And it ended a lot of relationships very badly, but I could not ask my fans that I had accumulated the bar to come down and see such very bad shows under my name. I'm sure everybody here has had some experience related to it. It was not fun. Okay. Ellen Stewart occasionally called on me, as I say, to do things for her. The only reason I didn't work steadily at La Mama all these years was I like to do a lot of shows. Ellen likes to do a lot of playwrights. If Ellen had ever wanted to give me a theater, I would have kept it full 52 weeks a year. But I fully understand her urge to help all the playwrights from all the countries. So I did my plays here, there, and yon. You know, I was very happy working in lots of places. But when Ellen needed me, I came back. Ellen asked me to come to Waltham, Massachusetts, to stage manage a Tom O'Horgan, Megan Terry play at an international theater festival. This was in '69. Waltham had not seen hair yet. Waltham was not ready, not only for the show, Waltham was not ready for us when we went down in town to go to Dunkin' Donuts. They had not seen, not only the show hair, they hadn't seen hair before. They hadn't seen beautiful French actresses in sequin jumpsuits. They hadn't seen gorgeous young German actors with 3 or 4 earrings and tattoos on their faces. We were asked not to go into town. Okay, it was like that. It was very educational for everybody. Tom O'Horgan did go into town to find the band because he liked Dunkin' Donuts. He went into Dunkin' Donuts barefoot. You all know who Tom O'Horgan is, don't you? World's greatest avant-garde director.
Are you sure they had Dunkin' Donuts then?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, it was a donut shop. Whatever. Throw her out.